The other day, I was kind of looking at some old Yu-Gi-Oh! Video game promotional cards, and I realized that many of these promotional cards actually were really powerful, and I didn't really remember that, but once I started going through all of the promotional cards that have ever been released in the TCG, I started realizing that I actually had enough cards to talk about in one single video, and that's what we're going to do today. So in today's video, we're going to go through the 10 most competitively viable Yu-Gi-Oh! Video game promotional cards, starting off at number 10 with RedEyes Wyvern. Now, this card might look pretty unassuming to the newcomer to Yu-Gi-Oh! However, this card was an old school powerhouse, mainly used to revive RedEyes Darkness Metal Dragon around 2009, and this actually saw play in a variety of disaster dragon lists pretty much right up until the release of Chaos Dragons with Light Pulsar Dragon, which pretty much power crept this card out of existence. But before that structure deck came out and before Light Pulsar Dragon became the new cool way to summon RedEyes Darkness Metal Dragon, RedEyes Wyvern was played in pretty much every single disaster dragon deck list, so it's going to make this list maybe not as powerful or as splashable as many of the other cards that are going to be in this video, but still noteworthy enough to mention. Next up, the card that everyone loves to hate, Nurse Reficule, the Fallen One. Well, at least that was what it was formerly known as. Now it's known as Dark Lord Nurse Reficule. This card is one of the most infuriating cards to play against. It basically was the namesake of the Nurse Burn deck that used cards like Upstart Goblin and Gift Card and Paths of Destiny to inflict a ton of burn damage to the opponent. Even though those decks were inconsistent, they did see a ton of play at the competitive level. This card has not seen a lot of play recently, despite the fact that the Dark Lord tag makes it searchable and also fits into an existing strategy out there with tons of draw power. Even though those things actually do technically buff this card, I think the Nurse Reficule strategy as a whole probably won't see play for a long time, especially with Upstart Goblin currently on the limited list. However, this deck was a force to be reckoned with back in the day, and it actually did start out as a video game promo, so we're going to talk about it in today's video. Moving on though, we have a much more combo-centric card, which is Spell Striker. Nurse Reficule is more of a linear card, usually just used for that one combo, but Spell Striker has been used in a variety of decks. It's often used to facilitate synchro summons or exceed summons, even though this card was released before either of those two things were a thing, which is kind of funny to think about. This card actually saw play in a variety of combo decks and likely would have been a pretty good choice for Goki in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! If cards like Junk Forward didn't exist. Yes, it does take a bit more setup nowadays, especially keeping in mind that when Spell Striker was at its highest popularity, Reinforcement of the Army was at least at semi-limited but often at unlimited, which meant that you could instantly search the Spell Striker and play it from your hand because Reinforcement of the Army actually put itself into the graveyard as a spell card to banish for Spell Striker's summoning condition. I do not think it is that far-fetched to say that Spell Striker may see play in the future. It's a very useful card with a lot of utility, and it's just a really cool warrior monster. It might not look that scary in 2018, but Kinetic Soldier actually saw a ton of side deck play for a very long time, even as recently as 2011 against the full power 6 Samurai deck when they had Gateway at 3 copies per deck, and this card is just an all-around great counter to a variety of warrior strategies. Maybe not in 2018, but pretty much up until 2011, 2012-ish, this was seeing a ton of side deck play in every single slower strategy, and I think that even though we probably won't see this card ever played competitively again, it is worth noting that it did see a ton of play for a ton of different formats, pretty much for a long history of Yu-Gi-Oh! Every single deck, as the meta decks were playing warrior monsters, they were some of the most versatile monsters to search out with Elemental Hero Stratos. They're really good to search out with Reinforcement of the Army, and Kinetic Soldier, now known as Cypher Soldier, actually could just counter all of those cards when the game wasn't so destruction based as it is in 2018. While it is true that I make fun of Dark Bribe a lot on this channel, I do not want to ignore the fact that this card actually was an excellent pick way back in the day, and I believe I even spent a couple minutes in my Why Nobody Plays Dark Bribe video talking about how much of an impact this card had on old school Yu-Gi-Oh! There weren't a lot of effect negations back then, especially for spell and trap cards, and many of them were really limited or just made you discard cards. I think of things like Magic Jammer or Trap Jammer, two cards that either are limited or make you have a really bad drawback. Dark Bribe did see a lot of play back in the day and is currently seeing play in a couple True Draco and Frogplay Zoic lists from the 200th YCSs ran a couple weeks ago, which is pretty mind-blowing to me. But yeah, Dark Bribe was a video game promotional card that saw a ton of play, not even in like the counter fairy strategies that we're thinking of in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! it just saw play in a variety of trap-based decks, which is pretty cool. Back in the day, there wasn't so much negation, so by playing Dark Bribe, you can negate really powerful cards like Monster Reborn and Heavy Storm, stuff like that, and that is sort of one of the reasons that Dark Bribe isn't as good in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Is that so many of the powerful cards you negate with this card are actually at 3 copies per deck. However, back in the day, negating a card like Heavy Storm, you knew your opponent wouldn't actually have another copy of Heavy Storm to draw into, therefore Dark Bribe had a lot more utility and a lot more power. Admittedly, I actually did not know that Mind Control was a video game promo, however it is, and it's actually an extremely powerful card even right now, and that's pretty crazy to think about how long ago this thing was released. This card came out in 2005, and when it came out, it was not very good. If you think of the 2005 metagame, there aren't synchro summons, there aren't exceed summons, there aren't any sort of extra deck summons besides fusion summons, which makes Mind Control really lackluster. If you look at this card in the context of GOAT format when this card came out, you can really start to see why this card seemed really bad. I mean, all you were doing with monsters back then was tributing them and attacking with them, and Mind Control restricts both those things. However, this card has aged very, very well and gets better with every new extra deck release, and like I said earlier, it is currently seeing play in a variety of Mech Knight and Invoke strategies, which is really cool to see a card like this currently at 3 copies per deck, still tearing it up at the tournament landscape. In a couple weeks, we will officially have the new errata version of Destiny Hero Disc Commander printed for everyone to see. Actually, this card recently came off the Forbidden and Limited list with the errata in effect, but right now there aren't any copies in circulation that have that new effect printed on it, but I want to focus on this card pre-errata and the reason that it got banned in the first place. So this is a level 1 warrior monster from a video game, and it says pretty straightforward, when this card is special summoned from the graveyard, draw 2 cards. It's not even an optional effect, which means it can't miss timing. This card is insane and basically was one of the best things to discard for cards like Destiny Draw, and then revive with things like Premature Burial, Monster Reborn, and all sorts of stuff. Not to mention you could search this with Elemental Hero Stratos, which was played in pretty much every single deck when this came out. Destiny Hero Disc Commander was just one of the many really powerful Destiny Hero monsters, and really helped many of those Elemental Hero decks using Destiny Heroes back in the day with a lot of dark monsters. We had Malicious and Disc Commander. It really helped them have a fully fledged engine instead of just a couple good cards. It had a whole bunch of great cards, and one of them was Destiny Hero Disc Commander. Next up, we have the card that immediately power crept Sakuratsu Armor, and that is Dimensional Prison. So way back in 2007, this card was very powerful, don't get me wrong, and it actually didn't see a reprint for 3 years, which made this card quite expensive. I remember as a kid in 7th and 8th grade really struggling to get my hands on copies of Dimensional Prison because it was just so hard to come by. However, this card saw competitive impact all the way through 2014, which is insane to think about. Yes, this is one of those cards that saw play up until Duelist Alliance came out and changed the entire Yu-Gi-Oh game forever, but up until then, people were still playing Dimensional Prison. It was an awesome counter to Fire and Ice Hand, but just in general, banishing cards is really good. It still is really powerful to activate a card like Evenly Matched and banish all of your opponent's cards, and while Dimensional Prison obviously isn't that powerful, it was a really good piece of spot removal for a variety of decks. Pretty much every single trap-based strategy back then played Dimensional Prison, and like I said, it power crept Sakuratsu Armor, a card that did see play up until this card came out. We're down to the last 2 cards in this list, and it's really hard deciding which one is first and which one is second. You might have noticed throughout this video I haven't really been mentioning the number of the rank of these cards, and mostly because I feel like in general many of them are similar power levels. However, these top 2 are so beyond anything we've talked about that I have to put them in their sort of own category. So at the number 2 spot, and this might be a little controversial, we have Infernal Archfiend. Yes, Infernal Archfiend first came out in a promo for a video game and obviously saw play multiple times as the best deck in multiple formats. Pretty much as soon as Shining Darkness came out, Infernities were the best deck. They could synchro summon so many Trishulas on the very first turn, and then later on we saw Synchro Infernities come back for a little bit. A little bit after that we saw the rank 4 version of Infernities come out, and then that deck sort of reigned supreme as either the best deck or a solid solid rogue deck for years until all of their cards pretty much got limited, and then you even still have some dedicated Infernity players. Despite the fact that there's so many cards of that deck hit on the ban list, people are still playing the strategy even in 2018. Such a powerful card, such a powerful deck, all sort of hinging on the search power of Infernal Archfiend, just searching over and over and over again. This is a card that really teaches us about why hard once per turn effects are really important for not making decks too crazy. Last but not least, we have the card that I feel more so than any other card on this list has seen the most play in the most formats, in the most strategies, and that is AntiSpell Fragrance. Yes, it might sound crazy, but this card actually came out way back in 2003, and even though it wasn't that good back then, this card, very similar to Mind Control, has only gotten better with age. Obviously, the big push for this card to be good was the release of Pendulums. This is one of the best counters to Pendulum strategies, if not the best counter, and is currently seeing play in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Against decks like Sky Strikers, in decks like True Dracos and Altergeist. I think as long as Pendulums exists, which will be forever, AntiSpell Fragrance will always be a popular main deck and side deck choice, and it's really a card that has popped up so many times in so many different strategies. It's really crazy to think about that this card was released way back in 2003, and like I said, it didn't see a lot of play. Pretty much up until the release of Pendulums, people were not playing AntiSpell Fragrance because it wasn't really stopping an entire mechanic. But one of the counters to Pendulums that people sort of argued the reason that Pendulums couldn't ever be truly the best deck, even though they weren't quite right because Pendulums a couple times were the best deck, but AntiSpell Fragrance existence really does hinder the Pendulum player. Anytime a Pendulum player is going into games 2 and 3, they have to be thinking of this card, which is absolutely crazy to think about. No matter how good a Pendulum deck is, every single one of them can be countered by just flipping AntiSpell Fragrance. Anyway though, that is going to wrap up today's video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Let me know what some other video game promos that you like are. I think one that I wanted to make this list but didn't see enough play to quite make this list more so than these other cards was Exploder Dragon. I love Exploder Dragon. I think it's a really cool piece of spot removal. It did see play in a couple Dragon Ruler decks, but not enough play to actually make this top 10 list. I will see you guys later though. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.